Hello everyone, it's me again. I'm taking over my amazing husband's channel one more time and asking questions that you guys want to know. So if you want to ask him any more personal questions or interested in other kind of subject than health and longevity and performance, put them in the comments below and make sure to look at them and then pick some for next time. So today I have a question that I'm not sure if you want to answer it, but I saw many people asking me this. And it's quite a simple, but maybe a complicated explanation with it. Where are you from?
Oh, that's actually, I'm glad you asked me that. No, I do want to discuss this actually.
I saw many countries were discussed. Greek came back quite often.
Yes. Also, Greek, Jewish. Oh my God, actually, those comments are so annoying. I got a lot of comments like, the Arab guy is a good interviewer, or I know this guy is Arab, like I'm trying to hide where I'm from, or something like that. It's very annoying. I'm glad you asked me this. This is a great question. I see Lucie asked really good questions. And we'll ask you where you're from also afterwards. So maybe you should say where you're from first, since mine is going to be long.
No, I'm simply from France, a small city next to Lyon, and about an hour and a half from Lyon in the middle of France. And that's about it.
Which, by the way, I thought it was cool that Lion sounds like lion, but it turns out not to be from the word lion. The etymology is from some Roman, some complicated word that the French simplified in terms of their syllables. So Lucie's from France. Her name is actually not Lucie, it's Lucie.
Lucie.
But I never pronounce it right. And so basically, the reason why I don't always quickly say where I'm from is because I'm from two places. My father's side is from the Arabian Peninsula, and not Syrian or Lebanese or Jewish like many people thought, but these are all Semitic peoples. There are many kinds of Semitic peoples in the world. There are Arabs, there are Assyrians, there are Jews, there are also three different kinds of Semitic, at least three, up to 5 different kinds of Semitic peoples that are very not well known, living in the country called Oman. So there are many Semitic languages and Semitic peoples. My father is from the Arabian Peninsula, and I spent some time on the Arabian Peninsula during my lifetime. Now, my mother is from the US. She is, I'll tell you a little bit about my ancestry because I'm very interested in ancestry, but I should mention a couple of things. So, whenever I lived in the US, Americans treated me to some degree as a foreigner because I have a slight accent because I lived abroad for a long time. So even my American family treated me somewhat differently, right? And when I lived in the Arabian world, I was treated as an American or as a white person. So both places treated me as something not one from them, right? And so anyone who grows up like this, it develops some kind of, he has to come up with his own identity. But for me, I decided to be patriotic about both of my ancestral heritage on my own. Although each of those people, to some degree, does not consider me part of it. But it's not up to them. Because in reality, I'm from both of the places, right? So I speak both Arabic and English. And I know my ancestry very well in the Arab world, as well as in the American world.
And you lived in both places too, so you absorbed the culture of...
Both, yeah. I lived in many places, though, not just the Arab world and America. But yeah. The point is that, so in terms of, I also, people ask me a lot of the time, where are you from originally? There's no original. I have no immigration in my family. My father does not live in the US, he's not American, nothing like that. Nobody immigrated here. I mean, my mother, everybody in America immigrated at some point. But anyway, I'll tell you more about my American side. The Arab side is not so interesting, but I mean, for most people, they don't know so much about Arab ancestry. But my mother's side is from, basically most of my mother's ancestry is from England and Scotland. Most of the ancestry arrived in the US. I know the family tree extremely well. I mean, I've done
spent a lot of time doing his family tree. It's extremely impressive.
Extremely detailed. One of the most detailed you can ever find. So, and I really know this, how to do this very well. So most of my ancestry on my mother's side comes from England and Scotland. Most of them settled in the US before 1680 or 1670. So mostly in Virginia. A little bit in later in North Carolina or South Carolina, I can't remember, and then some of them moved to Virginia, and then basically my ancestors fought in the Revolutionary War and the Civil War for the South, in the World War One, in World War Two also. I have relatives who were captured by the Japanese. I have relatives who were involved in some of the major battles of World War One. And my great ancestor was actually captured by the Northern forces during the Civil War and held captive for a while. I found some records of that. It's very interesting. So my mother's side, actually I only have like 3 people on my mother's side who immigrated later than 1680 or so. One was a French person. Remember, I have a French. And then one was a German from Hamburg. And then one was a Welsh lady who immigrated. These all immigrated in the mid 1800s or mid to late 1800s. So, but almost everybody else is what they call a WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So also I have some relatives actually that are Amish, which is really interesting. So I have like one group that are Amish. But basically my family live in, they originally lived in Virginia, then they moved to Alabama. And my family has groups in Alabama, in Texas, and in New Mexico, and in Louisiana. There's a few branches of the family. And in fact, in Texas, I have a lot of relatives, some of whom are from the first settlers with Sam Houston in Texas. So this is why, I don't answer these questions quickly because I have 2 identities, sort of. I'm not, my mother's from one side. I spend a lot of time with my mother's family, and my father's from one side, and I relate to both of them. So it's not an easy question to answer. And I'm glad you asked this question because what I'm going to do now is every time I get one of those comments, I'm going to link this video so that I don't have to, because what am I going to type 3 sentences each time? I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to, I'm not going to say I'm American or I'm Arab only. I mean, it's not true. Yeah, it doesn't represent me. So it's both things.
So what would you say to people that have two culture, 2 identity, how to combine those 2, how to find your own identity, what was your process? Because it's not easy to be different than each family member, and I can relate to that in some ways.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult actually. I've noticed this. I've met a lot of other half Arabs, and I've met half everything. I mean, half a lot of things, obviously, but I mean, I'm specifically with half Arabs. I noticed that most often they don't speak Arabic, or very rarely they only speak Arabic and they don't speak English. Usually they have a strong identity crisis, and for sure I experienced this in my life at some point also, because the Arabic side will treat them differently. The half Arabs I met that grew up in America, especially without their father, tend to have no identity crisis.
Yeah, because in Europe is the same thing, and in the Arabic Peninsula it's very similar. The identity and the culture and the patriotism is very strong, while in America everybody is immigrating. I mean, there is a strong patriotism, but they still it comes from immigration, so it's a bit different. It's a bit easier, I think, to integrate. When you're different in Europe and I'm sure in Asia it should be the same. They treat you extremely differently, like it's more harsh.
True, I've heard that from my Korean friends also, experiencing a similar thing, not being fully accepted there. So, to be honest with you, my experience is that at least for me, I could never be fully accepted in that culture. Because there's some people that will, in Arabic culture, as opposed to Jewish culture, your heritage comes from your father's side. So technically they're not supposed to consider where your mother's from. If your father's Arab, then you're Arab. But a lot of people don't do that. So there's sometimes racism. So it depends on where your mother's from, but if your mother's from certain countries, like for example, I grew up there a lot after September 11th, so there was a lot of American and Arab conflict in some way. So you experience some of that antagonism toward the xenophobia. But basically, you never get, in my experience, fully accepted by the people. So you have to stop deciding to give those people the right to decide for you who you are. And instead, you learn what this culture is, and you learn it properly, and then you decide. So for example, in my case, I spent a lot of time studying Arabic culture and Arabic history. And in large part, I probably know more about Arabic culture and Arabic history than most Arabs. And so even if sometimes I speak Arabic with an English accent, or I speak English with an American accent, with an Arabic accent, I still know more about that than them. And in the case of American culture, I also know a lot more about American culture and history probably than most Americans do, because people are not historians, so they're not trying to learn about it, right? So I did that. I also know a lot about English history and Scottish history. I know the ancestry of my family. In fact, I keep together one of my family's groups. I connect everyone together from my American family. So when you do that, you connect yourself to the past. Because what's this culture about? Culture is the heritage of our past that gets passed along through generations in an evolutionary process, where long cultures, they lose bits of them that don't work, and they keep the bits that do work to protect us as a humanity. So culture is valuable by definition. But to allow other people to decide for you who you are is not something you can do. So you have to come to your own grips with it. Now, to be honest with you, I've never really, maybe a couple of times in my whole life, I've met someone who was half something and half something else, who identified with both of them completely. It's very rare and very difficult. And sometimes you'll find that the people who grow up in the more dominant culture, like for example in Asia or in Europe or in...
Sorry guys, the battery died. So you were saying that people that grew up in a strong culture, they hate one culture more than the other or something.
Yeah, at least disassociate. Some I've actually seen hating. And I understand that feeling, especially if you have... That can get to a point where if you're treated badly by one culture for the part, but at least they disassociate from it.
Yeah, it's a bit like me. So my father was actually from a Germanic ancestry. I found out later, and I was adopted at the age of 2 by my stepfather, and I grew up, within the family. I do not look like any of them, and they made me always put me aside, in terms of not feeling a part of their group or their family at least. So that brings me a point that either do you think that I could never relate to them. I was always very different. Do you think it comes from the DNA that passed along to my father? So I'm not feeling being related to their culture because of my DNA. I see the world differently, or do you think it's because when I grew up they put me aside, so I kind of not connected with them and creating my own little way of thinking and own little way of my own culture, basically?
Yeah, that's a good point you bring up. I mean, having a DNA, 50% of your DNA different than the other group. But we learned later that her father was a very forward-thinking and exploratory kind of person, which you have these attributes yourself. It can't be by coincidence. It's really quite similar. She's very into the future and progression, and they even both liked sailing, apparently. There are many
no one in my family ever traveled or left the country. I took a luggage and I'm like, here you go. Yeah. Here I am in the United States.
You can't underestimate how much the genetics have
powerful,
to do.
Yeah.
But more than that, an interesting thing that you said is the aspect of looking different. So you're much taller than the rest of your family. You're much more blonde.
And I had this feeling not only from my stepfather's family, but also from my mother's family. There was two things. One, I was not looking like them. Two, I was born not, during a marriage.
Yeah.
So they always looking me as the black sheep. So it was two different family. I was treated differently, but still put on the side a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting personal, but this is true. Two things I want to comment on. One is the looking different. I also had this similar experience, of course, because in my case, my Arabic family, I mean, you guys, apparently everyone watching this is like, he's an Arab, but they don't think I look like an Arab at all.
You were too white, and in America you were too dark.
Yeah, they didn't think I look like an Arab at all. In fact, they always used to make jokes that I look Syrian. When I was a child, I always used to get called the Syrian. Actually, my family said I look American, but people on the street always used to think I'm Syrian. And for some reason, this was considered not a good thing where I grew up or something like that. I don't know why.
Nobody ever told you you were Greek?
No, I never got mistaken for European or anything. Maybe because I opened my mouth and then I don't sound European. But that happened as well, and so because of the way I looked, I would always be treated differently. Like people would if I said I was Arab or from the state that I lived in, people would say, "Are you sure? Where is he really from? Is he an immigrant from somewhere else?" And I'd be like, "That's not at all the case. I don't mind immigration, but stop calling me an immigrant. I didn't immigrate anywhere. You know what I mean?" So it's annoying. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that you mentioned, which is the family treating you different. Of course, I experienced that also. But not. I'm not complaining about my family.
It's not their fault.
You're not either. It's not their fault. It's hard for them not to. Yeah. Because you're very different than them. Exactly. Think of it this way: when your two parents are very similar genetically, you are also more similar to each parent. And you're more similar to their relatives, especially the individual parents' relatives, because you have very similar genes. Like you're getting half your genes from one parent and half from the other, but so many of those genes are similar to the first parent. Whereas in my case, when you're biracial, half of my genes are so different from the other half. So I don't look like either of them.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? I look so different. And in your case also, there's a lot of differences for some reason, although both are European.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think the solution to this identity issue for you, you don't think about it too much. But for me, the solution is, but I come from different cultures, like really different cultures. So in that case, it's to learn what your culture is. Because when you don't know your culture, people can make you feel ashamed or make you feel different or make you feel other. But when you learn your culture, you know what your culture really is. And you know it better than them. Then they can't make you feel that way.
That's true.
You see what I mean?
I mean, you have bigger knowledge of both cultures than anyone in your family.
Exactly. So they don't know their culture as well as I do. So they can't, what can you say to me? There's nothing.
Read books, guys.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what you should do. If anyone has that kind of issue, you're biracial or something like that, know your culture. And keep in mind, your identity is of both. You're one of both. And you are biracial, which is another identity also, right? So there's all those kind of things. Anyway, thank you guys for listening. I don't know if this was interesting, but I appreciate your question, Lucie.
I hope it is.
Hopefully it's helpful. All right.
I will see you next time, guys.